I've got an idea. If AI really is as successful as they says, perhaps we won't all have to work as long anymore. Maybe only 4 or even 3 days.
You are not the first to think of that. Economist John Maynard Keynes came up with this idea in 1930 in his essay Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren.
That affects me. I mean, I am, after all, at least Keynes's great-great-grandson.
I draw the conclusion that, assuming no important wars and no important increase in population, the economic problem may be solved, or be at least within sight of solution, within 100 years. This means that the economic problem is not, if we look into the future, the permanent problem of the human race.
Okay, so we have 4 years left. Do you think we can make it by then?
Keynes' perspective on the economy spans centuries. From the Stone Age to modern times, there were hardly any changes. He is amazed by the lack of significant technical innovations before the arrival of modernity. And then it all happened very quickly. While famines were a regular occurrence in earlier times, modernity created a whole new phenomenon: unemployment.
We are being afflicted with a new disease, of which some readers may not yet have heard the name, but of which they will hear a great deal in the years to come. Namely, technological unemployment. This means unemployment due to our discovery of means of economizing the use of labor, outrunning the pace at which we can find new uses for labor.
I think we all know very well today what technical unemployment is. In this respect, Keynes was a real visionary.
No, not really, because Keynes believed that this problem should already have been solved by now.
But this is only a temporary phase of maladjustment. All this means in the long run that mankind is solving its economic problem. I would predict that the standard of life in progressive countries 100 years hence will be between 4 and 8 times as high as it is today.
Okay, I'm trying to understand this. Our standard of living has indeed improved significantly, but what's that got to do with unemployment?
Thus, for the first time since his creation, man will be faced with his real, his permanent problem. How to use his freedom from pressing economic cares. How to occupy the leisure which science and compound interest will have won for him, to live wisely and agreeably and well. For 3 hours a day is quite enough to satisfy the old Adam in most of us.
Well, he was totally wrong about that. These days, we work longer hours than we did back in 1930.
He didn't see consumer society coming. Even back then, people had everything they needed to be happy. What they lacked was free time. The idea of having free time was alien to them.
Yet there is no country and no people, I think, who can look forward to the age of leisure and of abundance without a dread. For we have been trained too long to strive and not to enjoy. It is a fearful problem for the ordinary person, with no special talents, to occupy himself.
But Keynes ends his essay on an optimistic note.
We shall once more value ends above means, and prefer the good to the useful. Meanwhile, there will be no harm in making mild preparations for our destiny, in encouraging and experimenting in the arts of life as well as the activities of purpose.
But he is pretty optimistic about that. In fact, I would say he's rather naive.
At first, he couldn't imagine that most people would want to consume more and more. But then, just 6 years later, he had a change of heart and wrote his magnum opus, The General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money.
I think strong that the great majority of individuals would prefer increased income to increased leisure.
And with that, leisure time came to an end. Work creates more work.
But one person disagreed with him. This was his friend, the philosopher Bertrand Russell. He wrote the essay Praise of Idleness. For him, doing nothing was not a problem.
He says this as, a philosopher.
His argument is primarily logical. Russell was really into logic and tried to explain the economy based on logical principles. Having lived through the First World War, he wondered how a war economy could function at all.
The war showed conclusively that, by the scientific organization of production, It is possible to keep modern populations in fair comfort on a small part of the working capacity of the modern world.
The war was also financed through large loans.
That's right. Nevertheless, the fact is, productivity went up during the Industrial Revolution, meaning that fewer workers were needed to produce the same quantity of goods. Russell provides a very logical explanation of this in a long example.
Suppose that, at a given moment, a certain number of people are engaged in the manufacture of pins. They make as many pins as the world needs, working, say, 8 hours a day. Someone makes an invention by which the same number of men can make twice as many pins. Pins are already so cheap that hardly any more will be bought at a lower price.
Then you can lay off half of your workers.
Russell comes to a different conclusion.
In a sensible world, everybody concerned in the manufacturing of pins would take to working 4 hours instead of 8, and everything else would go on as before. But in the actual world, this would be thought demoralizing. The men still work 8 hours. There are too many pins. Some employers go bankrupt, and half the men previously concerned in making pins are thrown out of work. There is, in the end, just as much leisure as on the other plan. But half the men are totally idle, while half are still overworked. In this way, it is ensured that the unavoidable leisure shall cause misery all round, instead of being a universal source of happiness. Can anything more insane be imagined?
His argument is certainly logical. But then, perhaps people just have too much free time. Even when they receive unemployment benefits, the unemployed are still unhappy with their situation.
Research has shown that unemployed people suffer most from social contempt, not from having too much free time. The idea that people have too much free time is exactly what the rich have always thought about the poor. They think it's fine for rich people to live off their money without working, but when it comes to the poor, they always demand full-time employment.
The idea that the poor should have leisure has always been shocking to the rich.
Otherwise, they might not be as wealthy as they are now.
But the communists were also against the poor having leisure time. Marx wanted to mobilize everyone to work. For him, economic growth was the priority, not giving free time to the population. This shocked his son-in-law, Lafargue.
A strange delusion possesses the working classes of the nations where capitalist civilization holds its sway. This delusion is the love of work, the furious passion for work, pushed even to the exhaustion of the vital force of the individual and his progeny. Instead of opposing this mental aberration, the priests, the economists, and the moralists have cast a sacred halo over work. Our epoch has been called the century of work. It is, in fact, the century of pain, misery, and corruption.
It's all very subjective. There are also people who enjoy working. Also, Russell wasn't a communist. He was never particularly concerned with the welfare of the working class.
Yes, Russell also criticized the communist position using a philosophical argument. To do this, he draws on Kant's ethics, the categorical imperative.
Okay, so I think it goes like this. Act in such a way that your action could always be a universal law.
His main point is that you should treat others and oneself as ends in themselves, not as means to an end. Therefore, the object of a moral action is inherent to the action itself.
The modern man thinks that everything ought to be done for the sake of something else, and never for its own sake. The notion that the desirable activities are those that bring a profit has made everything topsy-turvy. Broadly speaking, it is held that getting money is good, and spending money is bad. We think too much of production and too little of consumption. One result is that we attach too little importance to enjoyment and simple happiness.
That's not entirely true. Advertising is everywhere, tempting us to buy stuff. No capitalist has ever spoken out against consumption.
Consumption is good as long as we buy something. It becomes problematic when it takes up too much time. We can buy as many clothes as we want as long as we will put them in the wardrobe afterwards. That's not what Russell means. He criticizes money becoming an end in itself. Then we lose our freedom.
Modern technique has made it possible for leisure, within limits, to be not the prerogative of small privileged classes, but a right evenly distributed throughout the community. The morality of work is the morality of slaves, and the modern world has no need of slavery.
The concept of slave morality was developed by Nietzsche.
Russell was also familiar with his philosopher. Nietzsche was a philosopher who linked action to power. Russell picks up on this idea when he criticizes the prevailing ethics of capitalism.
The conception of duty, speaking historically, has been a means used by the holders of power to induce others to live for the interests of their masters rather than for their own.
But Nietzsche wasn't worried about the fact that most workers had no free time.
Nevertheless, he rejected capitalist consumer society. 150 years ago, he wrote a text that is still relevant today.
Leisure and idleness. The true vice of the New World is already starting to spread to old Europe, making it savage and covering it with a most odd mindlessness. Already one is ashamed of keeping still. Long reflection almost gives people a bad conscience. One thinks with a watch in hand, as one eats lunch with an eye on the financial pages. One lives like someone who might always miss out on something. Rather do anything than nothing. Even this principle is a cord to strangle all culture and all higher taste.
Russell follows Nietzsche's line of argument. He distinguishes between free and active individuals and passive slaves.
The pleasures of urban populations have become mainly passive, seeing cinemas, watching football matches, listening to the radio, and so on. This results from the fact that their active energies are fully taken up with work. If they had more leisure, they would again enjoy pleasures in which they took an active part.
Yeah, that's right. These days, people just sit around with their phones swiping through messages. But smartphones didn't even exist back then.
I think Russell and Nietzsche were both visionaries. They could already perceive the development towards a passive culture in their time. Both thought in terms of longer periods anyway. Russell concludes his essay with a reference to antique philosophy. The purpose of life is happiness.
Above all, there will be happiness and joy of life. Ordinary men and women, having the opportunity of a happy life, will become more kindly and less persecuting, and less inclined to view others with suspicion.
Today we are suspicious of strangers, and we don't have enough time for leisure activities.
Russell and Keynes were heavily criticized for advocating shorter working hours. Stieglitz point out that most people want to earn more money than they need for the bare necessities. They want to consume and enjoy a certain amount of luxury, and they can never have enough of that.
Individuals say they care about their families, that the most important thing to them is their family. They work hard for their family. But as I have suggested, there is some evidence that Americans work so hard that family life is destroyed. The means destroy the ends that they seek.
Only a few scientific studies have explored these ideas, but Russell anticipated this and describes the problem in his essay.
Another disadvantage is that in universities, studies are organized, and the man who thinks of some original line of research is likely to be discouraged. Academic institutions, therefore, useful as they are not adequate guardians of the interests of civilization in a world where everyone outside their walls is too busy for unutilitarian pursuits.
What are people supposed to do in their free time? They need to have something to do. Otherwise, many will then get bored.
It is an essential part of any such social system that education should be carried further than it usually is at present, and should aim, in part, at providing tastes which would enable a man to use leisure intelligently.
For Russell, a reduction in working hours must go together with higher investment in education. Just as you have to learn a job, you have to learn to develop yourself. Then, working on yourself is also work.
So, I think I get what you're saying. You're saying that leisure time is also work? Then work never ends.
But leisure time can be work that makes you happy.
Well, if that's the case, I'm going to take my leisure time now and say goodbye. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please subscribe and see you next time.